who is your community, right? Because in the more institutionalized you get, the more hierarchical you get, the more you're going to see, people with licenses and medical directed, and all of those people have years of experience and training in not building dual relationships, right? Like, I don't grab coffee with my doctor or my therapist. It's not. And I think what's happening in psychedelic facilitation and psychedelic coaching is they're like, we're building community.
Hello, Erica. Welcome to the Mass Canada podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. Um, just a little bit about myself. I'm your host today, and I'm Osheen. And we are joined by the wonderful Erica Siegal. Erica Siegal is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist, community organizer, and harm reduction advocate. She has spent the past 20 years exploring the diverse ways to create impactful, connective experiences while increasing community safety and wellness. Erica worked on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy clinical trials from 2014 to 2019 and has spent over a decade providing harm reduction and crisis response services at events and festivals worldwide. In 2019, she founded two organizations, Nest Harm Reduction and Consulting, and a California-based mental health practice that provides psychotherapy, outreach, education, and integration services. She recently founded Shine Collective, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting those who have experienced real harm from assault, abuse, neglect, coercion, and manipulation within the psychedelic communities. Given her years of experiences and unique lens on psychedelia, Erica provides commentary and insight into the risks and potential harm in the mainstream of psychedelics into society and culture. This
Hi.
is, I mean, you are so qualified. This is so great. Yeah, as I've read this many times, and as I read this again, I'm just like, wow. Um,
Yeah, it's been a really lovely challenging journey, as it is, I feel like, for anybody who's working in psychedelics these days.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I, yeah, I can't even imagine. When you say challenging, like, can you tell me a little bit about more about that?
Sure. The uniqueness of psychedelics kind of coming out of the underground and into
Mm,
mainstreaming, of whether that's into a medical system or into spiritual use, um the way to navigate the whole process. I feel like a lot of people in psychedelics, it's like we figured out the answer and now we have to like go back and show our work, and the process of showing our work has been revealing in the ways that we make assumption and hold judgment. And I think this the mixture of kind of harm reduction values into psychedelia is really interesting in being
hmm.
able to look at things like psychedelic exceptionalism and
Yeah,
access to information and access to training, and like how do we continue to allow access and also survive and also protect people from themselves and harmful facilitators.
right. And this is so interesting that you say that because I feel like this is such a new space. And I think I heard you say in a podcast, or maybe it was the interviewer who was asking you this, that sometimes everybody's feeling like the psychedelic renaissance is happening too quickly. And some people are like, no, but it's happening too slowly. It needs to go faster. There's like this dilemma of like, is it going fast enough? Is it going slow enough? What is your view on that?
I think, and this will probably be the theme of this, of a lot of this podcast, and a theme of a lot of the work that will be coming out of the projects that I work on, um, is correct. Like psychedelics are expansive, right? And they expand in all directions, right? And so there's more people who think we should speed it up and slow it down, and right, and like all experiences are valid. So it almost feels like instead of heading in a direction, that we're actually expanding outwards in all directions. Um, and that's like part of the psychedelic process, right? If you look at it from the
Yeah,
lens of integration, is taking a psychedelic is expanding this perceptual range to come back into yourself. And
right.
oftentimes people, we blur the boundaries on that.
Mm-hmm.
So like long-term difficulties, long-term like adverse events really are oftentimes helping people recenter themselves, helping people adjust to the new perception of reality,
Yeah.
um, and also kind of make sense of it, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that there are people who think that it's, I think a lot of people who say that we're moving, like we're not moving fast enough,
Yeah.
really comes from the lens of the underground is going to beat out regulation, as it has been over the past 50 years,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and so it comes from this place of the faster we can get the regulation in place, the more people we can protect, the more people we can serve.
Yes.
And also, that system's not perfect. The results aren't perfect,
Yeah.
right? But nothing ever is, right?
Yeah.
Like
True.
even in meditation, in driving a car, in existing in modern life, right? Like there is risk involved with all of it.
Exactly. And something like psychedelic clinical trials, like a person has to take the medicine and like it's not just like giving, I mean, meditation can be harmful as well, but it's like meditation is you're not taking a medicine. And sometimes it can be so risky. Like if people don't know their background, if people don't know their history, like if somebody has like schizophrenia in their family or like bipolar disorder, it can be so risky. And so we need we need clinical trials and we need to let people know that these are the things that you need to keep in mind before taking a psychedelic. And it can be, yeah,
A- Absolutely. I mean, I really believe that, they're not all psychedelics are for all people, right?
exactly.
Not all medicines for all people, right? Like,
Yeah,
and and one of the challenges that I've been seeing in the clinical trial and research community is like we're trying to standardize something that's not standardizable.
yes,
Right. And so it's like how much control can we have in these situations when part of the process is being out of control?
yeah,
Like, right? And so you can't predict everything that's going to happen.
hmm,
Um, or else you're just going to get stuck in like writing manuals and not actually practicing, right? You have to, I like
yeah,
to say, like, you have to run the simulation to figure out how you're going to handle a situation where there is an emergency in a psychedelic session, whether that's in a group session or whether that's in an office. um, right? You can sit there and be like, "Oh yeah, I can hold it together and get them a glass of water and everything
yeah,
else." Like, well, what happens when somebody takes all their clothes off? Like, what happens when you have a client that falls in love with you
yeah,
or pedestalizes you, right?
exactly.
How do you address, right? As you as a facilitator, like how do you handle that? And it's about being able to like keep these keep the awareness in check.
Yeah. It's so important to like let other people know of all these things. And I love that the work that you do, and especially at like festivals. And I was reading about the Nest Harm Reduction and the Shine Collective, and I was like, this is such important work. Like to go on a festival and to know that there is somebody who can like help you out when your journey or your trip is just going sideways. Just to know that sometimes helps,
Hmm.
and yeah, your work is extremely, extremely important. And I feel like more people should be looking into harm reduction. And I feel like it should go at the same time, like clinical trials and harm reduction should be happening at the same time.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
there is so much work to be done around
Yeah.
education and safety in all of the different settings in which people are engaging in psychedelic exploration.
Yeah.
And so whether that is in a doctor's office or at home or at a retreat
Hmm.
or at a festival, um, like all of those settings need to have some sort of boundaries and agreements and safety measures. And I do a lot of work consulting with like other organizations.
Right.
If you're a listener and you want to help your community out, you don't know where to start, you want to kind of self-organize, what would harm reduction and outreach look like?
Hmm.
You're welcome to reach out to Nest, and we're pretty like helpful in kind of what you need and what you would need to schedule and what staffing would look like. There's a great MAPS put out a book, oh God, probably a decade ago, called the Manual for Psychedelic Support.
Okay.
And you can find that, and it actually like it really goes through like a lot of how to create support in a recreational setting.
Hmm.
Um, Great read, highly recommend it. And also update, like, update it for how it applies to you and your community. Think it's really helpful.
Okay.
There's also a course on psychedelic.support. That's like a
Hmm.
basic harm reduction course, that's free if anybody wants to take that. Great resources there as well. Um, and post COVID festivals and pre COVID
Yeah.
festivals are a different beast. Um,
Yes.
Especially when it comes to things like safety and liability, right?
Hmm.
A lot of times now, there's some big kind of medical service companies that kind of have like wellness, like mental health wellness people attached to them, that are kind of doing harm reduction esque work, so kind of community outreach work, whether that Insomniac that does Electric Daisy Carnival, and all of the big like raves all over the world, they have their own internal harm reduction team called Ground Control.
Oh.
So if you're out there and you want to, like, and you're in a location where there's an EDC or where there's an Insomniac event, look for Ground Control. If you're going to those events, stop in the Oasis tent there, say hi to everybody, get information, like go and like check it out for yourself. And I think it's important also to, if you are an attendee or a psychedelic user or like a music advocate, is for you to like flood the contact us with like, what are your harm reduction services? What kind of wellness
Hmm.
services do you offer? Because the more that producers like have it in their aware and event producers have it in their awareness, the more they'll realize like this is what their customers want. Because oftentimes they're hesitant to
Yeah.
include it, because it's something that's been really kind of more, we haven't been able to talk about it.
Exactly. It's been highly stigmatized.
Yeah.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Now, if you want to support and become part of the psychedelic movement, Feel free to donate to MAPS Canada at the link in the description below. Thank you for helping our mission to support equitable access to legal and regulated psychedelic medicines for all Canadians.
When you consult clinics, what is the first, like, what are your steps that you take, like, when they are offering psychedelic assisted therapy?
Oh goodness. From like a clinical standpoint, I've worked with a few kind of like startup clinics around protocol. I work with other therapists, not
Mm-hmm.
just in the psychedelic space, but also in just the psychotherapy space of like who is your audience, like what is your like what's your ideal patient, right?
Mm,
We're not for everyone. Like no facilitator can facilitate for everyone, right?
exactly.
And also we can't neutralize ourselves, right? Like I was born in a female body, I identify as a woman. I can't be a man in another space. Like that's not who my identity is, right? There's certain
Mm-hmm.
things that are unchangeable for most people. I mean, there's so much that can be changeable these days, but like things that are like needing to be changed internally, and also knowing that like our resonance and the work that we do with people is like, we can say no, I'm uncomfortable. um I'm uncomfortable working with like certain populations because based on
Mm-hmm.
my own trauma history. Like great, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right, there are people out there that are like, I only work with sexual assault survivors, right? I only work with, right, like people have specialties. And so I think part of it is this, like, who do you want to work with? Like,
Mm,
why do you want to work with them? Like,
yeah.
right? And is this because you have identified kindredship with them, or shared lived experience that has inspired you to
Mm-hmm.
go and get training in this work? We see a lot of people who have military trauma who end up going into working with other military vets, right? Like, cool, like, you work with vets, that's great. Like, also,
Yeah.
like, right, part of it is how can we kind of like create our own identities so then we can create a ecosystem where we are actually serving all populations, where we are
And
actually like addressing all of that. And so
yeah.
this personal process that is like, who am I, who do I want to serve, like what does that look like for
Mm-hmm.
me? Is that I go into an office every day, is that I run retreats, is that I like right, do you want to work one-on-one, do you want to do group work, do you want to do like, right? And so I think it's for facilitators, people are like, I want to go into psychedelic therapy, and they start getting trained and like they don't actually clearly know exactly who they want to work with,
Right.
and they start working with a population that they think they really want to work with, or a medicine that they think they really want to work with, and then all of a sudden be like, oh, they're like, actually, I want to change the work that I'm doing. I like, or
Mm,
right, or I, as a facilitator, am facilitating too much. How do I take breaks? What does me taking
right.
breaks look like? What is me, right? Like, how do I take care? What is my support system when I need support? And so,
Yeah.
I think part of this is I being able to strongly stand in your own identity, whether that is a person, facilitator, brand, clinic, whatever. And then from that place, being able to say, I like doing long term work with long term difficulties, or I
Mm-hmm.
only want to be in a short term therapeutic facilitation role. Like, right there's challenges and dynamics to all of it, especially in, and this might kind of cross over to another subject, which
Uh-huh.
is like, who is your community, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
in the more institutionalized you get, the more hierarchical you get, the more
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see, people with licenses and medical directed, like, and all of those people have years of experience and training in not building dual relationships, right? Like, I don't grab coffee with my doctor or my therapist. It's not a
Yeah.
thing. And I think what's happening in psychedelic facilitation and psychedelic coaching is they're like, we're building community.
Hmm.
And so they become community leaders that are also facilitating. And then you have all of these blurred boundaries of like who's a friend and who's making money and who's getting paid and who's getting power dynamic and who's dating who and it's like well, if you're in a clinical setting, like you're not gonna get um like into the personal life of your
Yeah.
facilitator when you are in more of a recreational intentional psychedelic community or or a religious like RIFRA community, where now all of the sudden there's like community potlucks and events and you're being invited to people's weddings and then your kids hang out together, and then all of the sudden you like don't people make right, people will pedestalize people in positions of power. And so if you are
Yeah.
in a facilitation stand, right, it's not about am I an ethical facilitator? It's like how my community perceives me when I'm in
Hmm.
a position of power. And it's like my responsibility to hold those boundaries. And so I think there's a lot of struggle with this crossover between community leadership and psychedelic facilitation.
Right. Yeah, it is so I feel like people take it completely differently from a therapist who just provides therapy without psychedelics. And there's like this relationship where you don't know anything about the therapist. The therapist knows everything about you. And that's how it goes. And that's how it's supposed to go. But as you're saying, in psychedelics, it becomes completely different. Like you're trying to become friends and you're trying to become a community, which can backfire. And sometimes it's just not necessary to do that. I want to ask you about, and I have so many questions. Like as you were speaking, I was like, oh my God. Um, there was a podcast where you were talking about keeping your ego aside while giving psychedelic assisted therapy. And I feel like in some of the points that you mentioned just now, it was coming up. So I just want to know, like, and also like sometimes therapists and doctors and all of these people can have God complexes because you're helping somebody heal from trauma, right? So like, how do you keep your ego aside when you are providing psychedelic assisted therapy?
Huh. Well, a really a good, honest answer is I don't actually do that much psychedelic assisted psychotherapy these
Okay.
days. Because I personally don't like the weird power dynamic thing that can exist in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, I mean, I do like when I do have clients, a lot of the work that I do these days is, especially in like the harm reduction realm, is being in like festival event, smaller gatherings
Mm-hmm.
where there's recreational use happening, where I am not in a facilitation role, but I'm more in like a safety role, an education role instead of a facilitator role. I am not,
Right.
besides being a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist, I am not formally trained in any indigenous ritual or anything like that. I do I've last year I did a couple of group ketamine experiences where I was on a co-facilitation team, and I really liked that because there was 5 facilitators and 10 participants, and every facilitator kind of held a role where we weren't, like pedestalized above anyone else.
Hmm.
So, especially in facilitation teams and like group work, I really like that model more than the one-on-one psychotherapy work.
Right.
It's
What would you
not
say?
my jam.
Uh-huh.
It's just not my jam, and we can go back to answering the question about this ego thing that comes up. Um, I take a lot of the work that I do kind of from looking at things from consent guidelines, ethical guidelines around religious leaders and health professionals, and also like the BDSM and sex work communities, like and being able to be like, well, these are people who go into really extreme altered states, like experiences and spiritual
Mm-hmm.
states experiences. Like, how do they address consent and boundaries and things and ego? And my personal opinion, which is not the opinion of all facilitators, but is that when someone is having a psychedelic experience in which I am holding a container for, um, that's actually the work, because when they're altered, they can't actually consent to
Exactly.
anything. We can consent to having a conversation around certain topics and bring those things up and also have this non-directed spiritual experience. I like
Mm-hmm.
to think of myself as like I have set the setting for you to have an experience. Like, I am here to help you go to the bathroom, get you a glass of water, and write down anything you want me to write down. And like
Mm-hmm.
get you art supplies if you want art supplies. But like when there's a difference between kind of this like inner directed and also
Mm-hmm.
like self-directed. It's like I am here like as the space holder to your experience.
Yeah, you're there to serve.
Not here facilitating work on
Mm-hmm.
you. I'm here to help you prep to get ready for it, to create the container for you to have it, and then help you process afterwards. And
Right.
so, like, the psychotherapy, like, facilitation element is, in the way that I work, is very much like in this self-direct, in this patient-directed, client-directed, like, model.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also been in, communities, especially plant medicine communities, where there is a trained facilitator who goes through ritual, who has song, does mapacho ceremony. Like there is, right? There are people that are facilitators of these containers.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of myself more as a space holder and a container creator than a facilitator.
I like that. Yeah, and I think you kind of answered my question about ego just by answering saying this because you know your space and you know that I am not gonna do this because I don't want to. And that itself is like a lot of people with high egos would be like, no, I can do this and I can hold space for people and I can do anything I want. And so just you saying that, yeah, thank you. I also want to ask you about, so you touched a little bit on that, but like when it comes to people of color and indigenous and black people, um, there is this thin line between harm reduction in clinical trials itself when it's run by purely white people, right? And it's like intersectionality of um, gender, race, color, all of these things that come in. And sometimes when the therapist is not attuned to their cultural um, like practices and where they come from, and is touch a good thing or a bad thing in their culture, like things like that. That can also be harmful, and we need harm reduction in terms of that as well. Um, what are your views on that? And if you've come across something like that, I know Rick
Yes.
Doblin is trying to hire more. I mean, trying to get more people of color therapists so that we get more people of color coming to clinical trials because it reduces bias and then they are more willing to come. But
Hmm.
yeah, I wanted to know your views on that.
Oh, I have lots of views on it.
Yes.
Um, I believe that again, right? Like I lived the experience in this lifetime as a Jewish woman. I
Right.
can't not be a Jewish woman, right? Like ethnically 100% Ashkenazi Jew. Like I am like this is the form that I am currently taking in this lifetime. And that there are things that we can't change. And
Hmm.
I do a lot of the work that the way that I frame it for myself, the way that things make sense to me based on my cultural framework is very much from like a indigenous Jewish perspective of ritual and Shabbat and lighting candles and atoning for sin and celebrating like our rituals and our harvests. And like I grew up in a really rich ritual based Jewish culture. Um, and so, of course, my lens and my framework resonates more with people who have shared lived experience, right? And so, when we look at things like medical institutions and like, right, these things were started by the patriarchy. These things were started by the right, they were exclusionary to women, people of color, like anybody who didn't come from this this like hierarchical standpoint. And so
Right.
I think it is a reflection of the greater healthcare issue of bias in healthcare. I also think that um, and this is my standpoint, having been a researcher, having a clinical license and like doing that type of work,
Yeah.
is like the doctor's office is not the most appropriate place for this healing to happen, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like right, we heal in communities. We heal in community models. We can go in and do one-on-one work if we need to do one-on-one work, but like the integration has to actually integrate, right,
Yeah.
into your life, into your operating system, into your values, and being able to help people who have diversity of being like, well, tell me about your culture. Like, what does that look like for you? Do you have, right? Like, right. Part of it is cultural sensitivity. And part of it is like, are you okay with working with me as a Jewish woman in this position? And you can be like, no, I'd rather have somebody who is more identified with my culture. Great.
Yeah.
Then don't work with me. Right. But like,
Yeah.
I can't change me as a facilitator. And I think there's a lot of people making suboptimal choices for themselves out of desperation and access. Right. So somebody who is, let's say,
I resonate with that.
huh?
I resonate with that.
Right. And it's just like, let's say you are a low income, like queer woman of color. And you're like, and you live in a small town and there is one ketamine clinic that you can go to that's run by all white men. And like, that's not the most comfortable place. You as an individual might have experienced is institutionalized medical like bias and trauma. And so even going into those spaces. So one of the some of the work that I do at Nest, when I do go into psychedelic facilitation, I actually, we don't have a brick and mortar building in Los Angeles. We are all virtual. And as a social worker, doing in-home services is part of my scope of practice. And so if somebody reaches out to me to do ketamine work or some psychedelic integration, I do offer the option of me doing in-home sessions. It seems like that's a
Oh,
better place for you.
yes.
Like, why would I make you get in an Uber in LA traffic and go back home or like like that doesn't make sense to me. Like, would instead of me driving 45 minutes to an office, like why don't I just drive to your house, right? And so part of this and there are and this is social worker lens,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yes.
right, doctor. But I also remember being a child growing up in the like 80s and 90s is like my pediatrician used to make house calls. Like we used to make house calls. We used to go into people's like that was part of our culture. And so I don't
Yeah.
see what like it stopped, and I'd like to bring that back. And so I would love it if people felt more comfortable doing more in-home services or mobile services.
Yeah.
And again, that's like the harm reduction lens, which is like we should just meet people where they're at. And like it seems like it's much easier for me to come to your home at 6 p.m. and co-create a container with you that feels safe for you to have an experience. You have that experience. And sometimes people don't have the home or the space or the access to be able to do that. They have kids, they have dogs, they have roommates, right? And so it doesn't work all the time. But like as an option,
Hmm.
why can't we do this? And I think we're seeing, and I know this is a Maps Canada podcast, but hopefully everybody's listening. This is one of the issues that we're seeing in policy and legislation in the US right now around like restricting access,
Yeah.
right? Right. If we're doing psilocybin for end of life care, not everybody has access to actually leave their home and their
Yes.
medical equipment and their right. And so, of course, palliative care and end of life psychedelic care should be offering in home services. But
Hmm.
the way that our legalization and policy is being written is from like a service center lens in like Oregon, and it's like and Colorado, and don't quote me on this because it is not fact checked, or somebody fact check
Okay.
um that in Colorado, like they're now saying that facilitators can't serve out of their own home. They have to have a separate office. And so all of these facilitators that bought beautiful homes that have guest houses and everything else in anticipation for this are now getting, and
Hmm.
now there's like you can apply for an exception or something like that. But it's like right there, there's this balance between access and safety and diversion measures of like how do we, and also not everybody who has like I think everybody should have access to psychedelics as long as you have the like are healthy enough to take them, have enough emotional support to be able to integrate these big experiences, which we're also seeing why there's a lot of harm is people are going into these experiences with facilitators not checking in to make sure that they have enough support at home and like a in-person an integration person they can work with long term if needed, um that were like causing inadvertent harm.
Yeah.
And this is not something that's criminal. Oftentimes it's not even something that's like right that has any tangible consequence to it. It's just like a shitty match.
Yeah.
And,
It's so true.
and it's out of desperation, right? I see a lot of
Hmm.
people who are I really think MDMA was for me, and I couldn't find access to it, but like I found mushroom chocolates, and boy, like I've tried them 4 or 5 times, and like every time I have a hard time with them. And I was like, well, then maybe mushrooms aren't your medicine. Like that,
Exactly.
right? And so it's just like people are trying things because they're hearing things without actually like checking in with themselves, because psychedelics are being viewed as like a miracle band-aid cure-all.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so true. And I feel like we should also look at it from a different perspective than we look at like a regular medicine, like an SSRI or something like that. Because as you're saying, like a person should be able to go and provide therapy in a person's home where they feel the most safe, where
Right.
they're aware of their surroundings, and then they don't have to drive back home in traffic while they're coming out of the trip, or even the next day, because they must be exhausted. Like if anybody has done psychedelics, they know you can't eat, you can't sleep during that time. So like being at home sounds like the best thing that can be done for the person and actually therapeutically beneficial for the person to be in that space. And even talking about like clinical trials, it's one of the reasons like the last FDA rejection that happened for MDMA therapy was like, oh, clinicians shouldn't do psychedelics or something. There was like one of the points. And it's like, I think there was one of the doctors who said something like, imagine if we provide ECT and then we have to take the electroconvulsive shocks ourselves or something like that. And people comparing these things is like so different from each other.
Right.
And I don't understand that you can compare ECT to taking psychedelics. But for a clinician to take psychedelics themselves and then provide therapy can be actually super beneficial. And why do you think people have that, like this block that, oh, this clinician must be, and like, colloquially, this is what I've heard, like this clinician is like a hippie or something like that. Like they are not legit if they are doing psychedelics themselves.
So part of it is, the war on drugs propaganda machine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Part of it is again, going back to the expansiveness, right? Is sure, psychedelic, like, right, like the problem is like, sure, you can call psychedelics a medicine if you want to. Um, if you want to treat a labeled disorder, right? And I like to view psychedelics as an access point,
Mm,
right? We go into these experiences, and I like to say, like, you can't choose your journey. You can go into a psychedelic journey being like, I am here to forgive my mom. And
yeah.
it might be like bonkers alien cartoon land. And like, your mom never even comes up because that's right. Like, you can't choose, like, I like to say, you can't choose your journey.
Mm-hmm.
Journey chooses you. um and that is the interaction of the psychedelic in you, not the permissiveness of, like, if somebody gets assaulted or harmed in a ceremony that they chose to be, like, I don't
Yeah.
mean it that way, right? I
Yes.
mean
Yes.
the internal shift of experience is like, that journey chooses you.
Mm-hmm.
um and I really think that oh wow, I totally just lost my train of thought. We're gonna
That's fine.
out for a
We are
second.
gonna edit
Oh, we're
from
gonna
here.
keep it. We're gonna edit right here. Whatever. What is this? It's 41 minutes. Um, Hold on. We were talking about. God, I wish I could go back and be like, oh, what were we talking about? I was talking about how the journey chooses you. But what was
Yes.
your question to that?
My question was how people look at psychedelics differently and how
Oh,
when. Okay.
okay, great. Sorry, I don't know how this is going to clip together. We might keep all of this in, and you guys can just listen to this and figure out, like, my
Yeah.
neurodivergence glitched my brain. And so really kind of like, right, the journey chooses you, and it is this expansion. Um, and it's not actually to treat like a medical disordered issue, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about treating mental health behavioral issues. And in a integrated lens, those are also spiritual ailments that, like, we don't have medical diagnoses for yet, right? But I would love to, like, if there was a DSM code for, like, existential dread related to the fall of democracy, like, right? And then like, then everybody could have access to psychedelics, but, like, right, it's
I
like
love that example.
the labeling of it is, sure, okay, so now everybody has generalized anxiety disorder because we are all anxious because of
Yeah.
the way that we're living. um and also, right, like, you can take a psychedelic to treat the anxiety, or take a psychedelic, and, like, they're actually, like, right, they are resonance shifters, right? They are perception shifters. They allow you to have access to feelings, emotions, thoughts, states of being, realms, um, that you don't normally have access to, right? So
Exactly.
instead of thinking of it as I'm sick, I take medicine to make me feel better. It's actually I am out of resonance with myself, I can take this and use it as a reset.
Yeah.
Right. And so do we need a ailment and a diagnosis and a CPT code and a way that we're going to bill it through like the Medicare system and like, great. And that's why people were like, we're not moving fast enough.
Yeah.
Because there's all of this red tape and bureaucracy that we have to get to be able to create safe access. And what's happening is the underground is thriving. And so there's also this like, and the underground is thriving. And so now all of these people are gaining access to psychedelics that are untested and unregulated, and facilitators who aren't the right optimal choice, and the right. And so now all of a sudden we have all of these factors that are actually making it not the right choice. And
Yeah.
so everybody's like, oh no, we need to slow down, because everybody's starting to get these little kind of minor harms because we don't have the safety infrastructure built for it yet. And so everybody's like, no, we need to slow down to build the safety infrastructure. And everybody's like, no, we need to speed up because like everybody's taking psychedelics now anyway. And so it's like, it's that double-edged sword of
Yeah.
expansion.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that answer. I had, and I'm also neurodivergent. I had a question and then I completely forgot about it. So, I
It's,
also want to ask you.
we're psychedelically minded, which means we're like in a constant flow state with ourselves and with our dialogue. And so sometimes what we wanted to ask 2 minutes ago, like, isn't the
Yeah,
right for the moment. So,
and I just remembered. This is awesome. I am in a clinical psych class right now, and we are taking a psychodynamics perspective, not a like a CBT perspective. And it's so close to what psychedelics do because it's like sometimes you take a psychedelic and you take like a heavy dose and it gets you to a point where the issue started.
mm-hmm.
And sometimes, and that's why I resonate with so much that you're saying, like it's not a medicine, it's like a reset, or it's like this this mindedness that we are all in, and just knowing where the issue started from, or why one has OCD, or why one has anxiety or agoraphobia or anything like that, it can help so much. And yeah, I just wanted to tell you that.
Yeah, no, like I fully agree. And also I want to like bring into the conversation and into the audience awareness is there's something about taking really high doses that
Hmm.
it is in subculture psychedelia, right? There's kind of this thing where if you've never taken a psychedelic before, and I've met a bunch of people in the recreational space over the years that are like, oh yeah, like, took a half dose and didn't feel it and blah, 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 didn't feel it. And there's kind of this like, no, you actually like first time take a full dose so you like know what it feels like. And so oftentimes people will be like, I'm going to go in and they like eat 3 grams of mushrooms and spend all this money and go to a retreat and do the whole thing. And they like find it. And then like 6 months later or 10 months later, or like whenever they feel prepared, they're like, wow, I would really like to revisit
Hmm.
um, that state or get more information in my process, in my healing process. And also, I now don't have the financial resources to pay for another retreat. Or I do want to do this, like, I do want another experience, but also, like, I'd rather have like a 1 gram experience and like be able to talk through it with a therapist, right? Or be able to, right? I think these really like the high dose, clinical dose, like scheduling, I think is oftentimes too much for novice minds, or sometimes not enough, right? There's this
Hmm.
like what works for you. And I think that process actually takes a little bit of time to figure out. And I think the medical model of like come in, get treated, you're fine now and leave is actually leaving people in a state of not fully integrated, because they might need to like go back in and like close the loop on something, and there's just no access point for that. And so we find a lot of people ending up in these kind of like intentional underground recreational communities where, you know, there's like, you know, the moms that get together and eat mushrooms together,
Yeah.
or like the guys who have their annual camping trip and they go off
Hmm.
and they, you know, go up into Yosemite and, you know, have a gram and a half, 2 gram day hike. And like,
Wow.
right. I also think that that is like totally like that is actually more of the integrated community healing model that removes the power dynamic of things, and also is like extremely controversial based on everybody who's trying to profit off of psychedelics.
Yeah, but I like that you say that it removes the power dynamics of it, because it's not regulated in so many spaces, but people still use psychedelics and go to underground spaces to use psychedelics. The power dynamics can be harmful, right? Like, other than the physical safety, there can be financial and emotional exploitation as well. And
Right.
right. And like, how do people navigate with that? And even before taking a psychedelic, let's say a person is really vulnerable and they don't know where to go and nothing is working and they're in a state of like really, really bad state, basically. And if a person says, this is where I'm going to provide you therapy and I'm going to take $5,000, you will be willing to give that because a lot of people are in that state of suicidal state and having suicidal
Oh,
ideation
yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah, there's actually there's a great chart, right? Like the correlation chart that usually is sitting here and it just like went away, which is like the more you are in crisis, the higher the risk you're willing to take, like the less you're going to be making good decisions for yourself.
Exactly.
And so the problem is the most sick people are going to, or the most distressed people are going to the most unethical people, because the people who are ethical and have the containers like don't, the crisis people don't have access to them.
Yeah.
And so then they end up in these situations where like, you know, I've worked with people who have been physically assaulted, sexually assaulted,
Oh my God.
financially embezzled from, financially like exploited. And I actually was motivation for me to get trained in working with cult dynamics and figuring out.
Oh.
I basically I spend most of my free time thinking about how to not build a cult. Like, how do we build a cult that's not a cult? Like, how do we, right? Like, how do we decentralize from like a community design standpoint,
Hmm.
right? Because everything will turn into a cult. Like,
Yeah.
check out the hundreds of now documentaries on weird shit on Netflix
Yeah.
and HBO, and I don't know why it's always got to turn into some like weird sex thing, but it like for
I
some reason
know.
always, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if you had a group of friends where nobody was having sex with each other and you can actually hang out, not have the pressure of it,
Yeah. And not isolated from family
huh?
and not isolated from family and not giving your bank accounts to one person who sits on top of the cult.
Right, which is so in that, and I want to be really sensitive to this because there are a lot of people out there that are kind of slipping into conspiracy theory and slipping
Mm,
into no longer trusting like societal good or societal, I mean, fall of democracy, but like, you know, we can go into that later, but it's kind of like a and what I've seen in people who have been in cults and had to deconstruct cults, and I like to think of this not just as cults but like as a divorced woman, like right, I had to go through like an identity fracture,
mm,
right? Like I and my ex-husband and I are still good friends and we're still like everything else, right? And I really value, like I set my own values, and I really value honesty, and I value integrity, and I value kindness, and I value creativity, right? Like these are not everybody has priority values. We all, right? Again, identity,
Yeah.
values, talk about like more of that stuff. But like as a Taurus and a Chinese New Year dog, like super loyal, super like, right? Like all you have is your word. And I like stood up in front of my friends and my family and community and like made vows and agreements that I could no longer keep.
Mm.
And I had to fracture part of my identity. Like
Mm.
the person who I thought I was in that, like had to basically like kill off and grieve a timeline that I thought I was going to live. And so I ended up going through a divorce, going through a loss of a parent, like any, or a big trauma, especially moral injury trauma, especially psychedelic trauma, is your foundation gets shook. And
Yeah.
you're like, the world that I thought I was living in is not the world that I'm living in anymore. And I don't know how to come to terms with that. I really enjoy working with people who were raised in evangelical or religious households that are deconstructing, right? Because it's
Mm.
it's a mirrored process for all of this. And it's all of a sudden you're like, shit, like the world I thought I was in and the person who I think I am is like not, and you actually have to rebuild that for
Yeah.
yourself, right? Um, and this is one of those things where ethical facilitators are like doing the work to know who they are, because you can't hold boundaries if you don't know where
Yeah.
your boundaries are.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
very insightful.
right? And so for people who are in cults, who have been in these high control groups, ran away with the ayahuasca circus for a couple of years, like ended up in like weird psychedelic polyamorous San Francisco sex cults, like whatever you guys are finding yourselves in. Like, this is your permission to be like, I'm going to recreate my reality.
Mm.
Right? Shit. I found myself surrounded by people who I no longer shared values or belief systems with. Shit. Like
Yeah.
that's scary. That's some scary, honest, deep work. And oftentimes those groups are like, well, if you leave, we're never going to talk to you again. You're going to be completely right. And there's this like manipulation and coercion. And so for me, it's like in the psychedelic space, it's like come and go as you please. I'm
Yeah.
not right. Like, but what I can do now is I can stand and say, here I am, and these are my values. And do you want to be in my circle or not? And you have the choice. I'm not telling you to be here. I'm not telling you that you can't go. And if you want to build community, this is how you build community. And if somebody
Yeah.
needs to leave because they're no longer in resonance with you, like allow them to leave. But people who have been raised in these high control groups, like I have a couple of friends who love cults. They're like, they've done Landmark, they've done this, they've done all the like, right. And they like go all the way up and they do the whole thing. And they just like, they like the process of joining.
Mm.
And they also like the relief of somebody in a position of power knows more than me, can handle this, should take my money because I believe. And it's like there's something relieving about giving away their power,
Mm.
right? Um, and so they go into all of these different, like they like cult hop or
Yeah.
the medicine community hop.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep getting in this cycle of harm because they keep looking for the answers outside of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
They keep looking for somebody else to tell them how to do it. And like the problem
Mm-hmm.
is you have to learn how to do it for yourself. No, like, right. And then you actually have to do it. Like nobody can tell you. They can tell you they're like, this is the path that worked for me if you want to walk this path. But as soon as it comes into this, right? This is why I think facilitators and community leaders should be separated,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think somebody should hold the doctrine of the community who is not in a position of facilitation.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we look at this from like a legal like from a religious organization, right, there is a religious leader. And then there's usually like a president or an executive director or something else, right? It's like what's happening in these individualized psychedelic like communities is there's no checks and balances. And so if you want to actually cultivate healthy community dynamics for yourself, you actually have to do the work to build the community. Right. And some communities are established and some communities are designed. And so this is a lot of, please follow me, and this course on community design is coming out this summer. And so this is like a little preview of it. But
Okay.
really helping anybody in the psychedelic community, peer support, right? Knowing as a facilitator what your what your motivations are.
Yeah.
Right? In a facilitation standpoint, and I'm confident in saying this, or not even in a facilitation standpoint, in a community leader standpoint, especially given when I was the volunteer coordinator for Zendo, and I was kind of out, and I would have contact with hundreds of people every year, especially in these spaces where I was in a supervisory position or in a position of leadership, not only for the people who are volunteering, but also for everybody who is coming in. And guess what? I don't date out of that pool. I'm not there to find somebody. I'm
Yeah.
there to hold space. Like my purpose is there. And so I don't, right. And some people come to that and they're like, oh, I'm going to volunteer at this festival. And like, maybe I'll meet somebody cute and maybe I'll resonate with it. And that is great if you're both volunteering. Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. But if I'm the one who's organizing it, and you're on my team, then right, the power dynamic exists whether I want it or not. And so for me, it's well, that's just, I'm not here for that.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of it is knowing yourself and how you show up in community and what your intentions are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And also for community leaders to be aware of who are the people coming into that community,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I am also seeing there's a lot of cultural appropriation going on, and a lot of people are not understanding why they are taking Saraswati's name, which is a Hindu goddess, why they are taking Kali's name. Or I was at this community gathering where I saw Ganesha, who's again a Hindu god. There was like a picnic sheet, and it was like Ganesha's photo on it, and people are like walking over it. And I was just so, I was like, I can't be a part of this because the community leaders themselves don't know what they are doing. For them, it's decoration. For them, it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, let's do this Hindu god thing. And I'm just like, no, this is highly inappropriate. This is just wrong on so many levels. Um,
Um,
and yeah,
were they open to feedback?
I don't think so.
Right. And so here's one of those things in a leadership power, community role. There has to this right, this is why we start building these small trusted communities, is because you need to be able to give feedback to somebody, to be like, hey, this thing, because maybe somebody in the community brought it and used it as a picnic blanket, and they as leadership didn't even know that it was there, right? It was part of it is, am I open to being able to allow for my community to bring me into awareness about what's going on?
Yeah.
What does that process look like? Right. I'm always give me some feedback. How do you want this to change? How can we make this better? What does this look like? And sometimes that slows me down. And also that that allows me to move as a team instead of in a hierarchical way.
Yes.
And there's a lot, right, with this same cultural appropriation, right? There is a difference between culture, like appropriate the term appropriation, and like respectful cultural honoring of things. Again, like bringing it back to my culture, like if I am in ceremony because I am a Jewish woman, do I only sing songs in Hebrew? No. I also sing songs in Sanskrit and in Quechua and in Spanish. And like, do I feel like singing a song in another person's culture is culturally appropriative or culturally honoring? Right?
Yeah.
Like, right? And that is from a thing of music. But like, do I think almost everything I have is like Jewish, Moroccan stuff. I was like, is there anything in like not of my culture? Which is like always my question. Right. And so part of it is like there's this piece of this is my identity and I want to be able to show up and share it with people and like be embodied and in my authentic self. And also if I am in a community, like if I'm creating a container for my community, how can I make it a space that is neutral enough to not offend,
Mm,
but also has enough of my tools and my vibe in it to facilitate. Like in
right.
right, it's like we're not going to go into a plain white room, like that's the hospital room, like right. And it's like what's
Yeah.
the right setting is nature, everyone, just to let you know, the correct setting is nature.
Yes.
But if we were to create space for people, it would ideally have indoor outdoor space. It would
Mm-hmm.
ideally have, and when I talk to facilitators about like creating safer containers, I ask things like, do you have a couple of different blankets in your office closet that are of different weight and texture?
Mm,
Right? Because somebody's like, oop, there was one blanket, it was made out of wool, it made me itchy, I was cold. Right?
yeah.
Like, right, there's certain things of like, okay, like what are the comfort items? What are the like how do I, and this is really where like psychedelic hosting comes in. It's like what are the things? Like, right, if we're having if I'm helping a producer host a party, it's like, oh well, let's make sure that we have like enough coconut waters cold in the fridge at all times. And I hate coconut water. And like, why, right? Like, it's not for me. But also, if I know that I'm going to be in an environment where people are, they like need the electrolytes, and most people like coconut water, and I don't. But that doesn't mean I don't buy it because I'm providing for community.
Mm-hmm.
I also am a big, like Philips Hue light bulb person
Oh,
because I like being able to change the lighting based on the
yeah.
situation. I am, if I'm missing something and all of the lights are dim, I want to be able to turn the lights up and like look for the thing I'm looking for and like reset the thing. And so if we have
Mm-hmm.
working with somebody who's in a really extreme altered state and they are confused and they are like, can you please turn the lights up? You want to be able to say, absolutely, let me turn the lights up, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to control music, temperature, physical space, scent.
Yeah. It's a sensorium experience. Like all of the senses are involved,
Right.
including mind.
Right. And so, how do we create a space that is resourced enough
Mm-hmm.
and neutral enough to not cause manipulation and coercion? Like, I
Yeah.
don't have, I don't encourage like Christian facilitators to have crosses all over their office if they're not only working with exclusively Christian clients. Like if you are, if you work from a Indian Hindu lens and that is what your office is filled with, but you're working with populace who might have been involved in conflict or have a multi-generational, physical parental trauma or any of those things where, seeing familiar imagery might actually be triggering for them. And so being
Exactly.
have that dialogue, and being able to create like creative neutrality, start at
Yeah.
a neutral place and be able to shift it. And so when you create a safe container, not only knowing how you show up in the space, but also how much control can I give myself in a facilitation role over the space?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And even having like plants and artworks in a space, and while a person is going into a journey, and let's say that painting is just like really scaring them, I feel like to be able to let the person know that, hey, if any of this causes any distress to you, just let me know and I will remove it and I will get it out of here.
right.
So, yeah, what you're saying is great. I had so many questions to ask you, but I'm so happy with the conversation that we had.
Let's do
I
it
have
again.
one last.
Let's like schedule another one. We can do a part two.
I would love that. Okay, great. Um, so I want to ask you one last question before I let you go. You founded two organizations,
Yeah.
Nest and Shine.
Yes.
So what do you hope to see in the future of psychedelic assisted therapy?
Oh goodness.
I
Well,
know it's a big one.
let me do like I want to do a Shine plug first. So
Okay.
Is the nonprofit that I founded that specifically works around psychedelic safety and harm, specifically around supporting survivors. We just launched a resource referral database that we are now looking for providers who are willing to work with long-term difficulties to sign up. Go to our website, sign up. We will be offering educational content and training for all of those people. You do not have to have a license. You do not have to have, like, if you want to help, we will find a way for you to help. So please join us. If you have been harmed, or if you think you've been harmed, or if you think you're in a cult, reach out to us. We can try to help you find some resources to make sense of that.
Hmm.
I am hopeful for the psychedelic future that we'll be able to create some infrastructure that will prevent harm. We're not going to stop all harm from occurring. I don't think that that's not a realistic human experience.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. And like we learn from oop, that's too much. Like we learn from finding out where our boundaries are. Like if we don't
Hmm.
if we don't take risk as human, like we don't actually like evolve or grow. Like part of it is being able to go into these environments and be like, oop, like did I make a good decision? Did I not make a good decision? We hope that people make better and better decisions over time, and we hope facilitators are able to articulate how they hold space and what they are actually offering and what their scope of practice and capacity is to do this work. And if they don't have the capacity to work with somebody who seems like it's going to be a really long-term case, you can say no, right? And it's really
Yeah.
hard when we have people who are sick and desperate reaching out to us. And so constantly looking for ways to create more access, to create more safety, and to create like communities of care that when harm occurs or when a boundary violation occurs, that they're able to talk about it. They're able to come to the
Yeah.
table and be able to work through it or find resolution or take a step back from roles of leadership or any of those things that might be, or if there's criminality or malicious acts, that the community works to say that's unacceptable behavior and you're no longer allowed to be in a position of power in our community.
Hmm.
You're no longer allowed to maybe participate in our community for a period of time because you violated our community boundaries. And so for me, like I don't allow anybody into my inner circle who has had a history of like physical or violent assault.
Mm.
Um and and that's my choice for my inner community, and that's not for the greater community, and that's think of it as expanding bubbles
Hmm.
and expanding realms around like who gets access to you and your inner vulnerabilities. And as a therapist and a facilitator, I understand the responsibility that I am in many people's inner circle of support that are not in mine,
Mm.
right? Right? It's not supposed to be reciprocal. And
Yeah.
that's okay. But I also know that people rely on me to be in their crisis with them. And I think the more we can create like those consensual, reciprocal, boundaried relationships, like the healthier our communities will become.
I love that answer. Thank you so much. Um, do you have anything you want to say that I did not ask you that you wanted to bring up? Or do you want to talk about any of the new things that are coming up in your future, like any clinical trials or any of your work? Um, this is your space.
Sure. Let me think about that. All right. Sure. We're always looking for new clients. If you're based in California or Colorado at Nest, we take some insurances. We specialize in psychedelic integration and challenging non-ordinary states, trauma, things like that. If you have somebody who's looking, we can always also help you find referrals. Shine Collective, shinesupport.org is the website. You can join our referral list. We have monthly learning groups around psychedelic abuse and harm. We offer drop-in groups for emotional regulation skills for survivors. But we're building on a referral list because what we know really works for people who have been harmed is to reestablish trusted ongoing relationships with home communities. And so if you are a trusted, ethical, like community member, join the Shine Network. So when somebody reaches out, we're able to provide them with that resource. And so we're really going to try to build this out. We're going to be putting out a self-paced course end of April about working with psychedelic trauma survivors to hopefully give people a framework of how to work with this population. And donate. It is a nonprofit. I know this is Canada, but like if you're in the US and you're listening, donate. I mean, if you're anywhere, donate. But there's some legalities about nonprofits operating in other countries as we start things up. And so less involved for that. But we do actually get survivors reaching out from Canada who are looking for resources. And so if you're a provider who is passionate about this work, reach out to us at Shine. I think that's it. Take care of each other out there.
Yes.
Ask a lot of questions. Test your drugs.
Test your drugs.
Carry Narcan.
Yes.
Right? And so, take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much. And on behalf of MAPS Canada and on behalf of me, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. This information can be so useful for so many people. And also, summer is coming up and festival is going to start soon. So this information is really, really useful. So I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Stay safe out there. And if you want to start a harm reduction program at your local festival or something like that, reach out to Nest. We'll give you hopefully some tools and directions about how to do that.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm David Bronner, Cosmic Engagement Officer. Dr. Bronner's board member of MAPS. Subscribe to MAPS Canada. Bam!